Yesterday, we saw the Seahawks and the Patriots punch their tickets to Super Bowl 60. That means we are one game away from the conclusion of this NFL season. It's always sad to see the football season wrap up, but the weeks leading up to the NFL draft are super exciting for us football fans. This is a time when the other 30 teams that didn't make the Super Bowl can improve their rosters through free agency and the draft. And the NFL draft gives hope to all those teams stuck in NFL poverty to finally make it out the mud, for all the other teams to make that jump into being real Super Bowl contenders. Over the next 2 to 3 months, we will be all over 2026 NFL draft content here on Yam Talks. And all that starts today with my first mock draft for this upcoming draft. This channel does primarily focus on fantasy football, but with this being the slowest quarter for fantasy football content of the year, I like to shift my attention to the NFL draft because the draft has major implications on the fantasy football and the NFL landscape as a whole. And I also just love draft content, so I really enjoy January through April talking about the prospects and how I think the draft is going to go. With that being said, if you love football too, and if you want to just be better educated entering this year's draft, make sure to subscribe to my channel. As always, I appreciate y'all. So we'll jump right in here. So for this being my first mock draft of the season, there's not going to be any trades. Of course, during the actual NFL draft, we are going to see trades. And as we get closer to April, I will start introducing trades to my mock drafts. But for now, I just want to focus on team needs and guys who I think, as of today, can realistically be at their natural draft position. So we'll start right here with the Raiders. And by the way, this is only a first round mock draft. We'll do rounds 1, 2, 3, maybe even beyond as we get closer to April. But I just want to focus on the first round for today. So the first pick is obvious. It's going to be Fernando Mendoza. He won the Heisman. He won the Natty. He is the best quarterback in this draft class in what looks to be a very weak quarterback class. And the Raiders need a quarterback. Geno's not going to cut it. We have a new coaching staff coming in here, and it all starts with the quarterback. We're not going to overthink this one. It's going to be Mendoza. And then moving on to 2. So it would have been Dante Moore here had he not decided to stay another year at Oregon. But I do think the Jets dodged a bullet with him returning to college. And I'm not saying this because I think Moore is a bad player. I think it's more so I'm not a Jets fan, but as an outsider looking in, I don't have a lot of faith in Aaron Glenn and this coaching staff developing a guy like Dante Moore, who I think looked great last season, but could have used another year of college, or at least could have landed on an NFL team where they have the capabilities to develop their rookie quarterback. And I don't think that's the New York Jets. So we have a lot of bridge quarterbacks coming up in this year's free agent class. And it's going to be the year of bridge quarterbacks with this quarterback class being so weak in the draft. So I think the Jets will take that bridge quarterback approach. And I don't expect the Jets to be contending. Well, definitely not contending, but even competitive next year. And with next year's quarterback class looking to be very strong, I think they just look to patch other holes on this roster now with Dante Moore not being in this upcoming draft and really focus on quarterback in 2027. So with that being said, they can go a lot of ways here. Arvell Reese makes a lot of sense. He's a linebacker who can also fill their needs at edge and really bring that pass rush threat. Other names that come to mind are Ruben Bain. And I think those are the 2 players that make a lot of sense. But I have a strong suspicion that we're going to see David Bailey, another edge in this class, really propel on draft boards as we get closer to April. He's already up there as a top 5, top 6 prospect. But when you watch the film, of course, Ruben Bain is a great player and is probably, as of right now, he is the number 1 edge going into big boards in this draft. But David Bailey pops. He's got that size. He's got elite pass rush capabilities. And I just like what I see more out of David Bailey as a pure pass rusher than Ruben Bain. Ruben Bain's got a little bit of concerns with his arm length and stuff like that, but I don't think his arm length is going to play a big role in where he lands in this draft. Similar to Will Campbell last year, I think that stuff is blown out of proportion. Ruben Bain's one hell of a player, and he's going to be drafted like one hell of a player. But I do think David Bailey is going to be a top 5 pick in this class. And just based on where I stand today, I am going to have the Jets taking David Bailey. He feels a big need for them at edge. And again, I think he's a guy who could be a destructive force for that D-line. So moving on to the Cardinals. The Cardinals really need to fix up this offensive line. They need a quarterback, but you're not going to address that at 3 in this draft. And compared to other positions of need, I think O-line is a massive need. They need a guard, they need a right tackle, and so I think they should draft a guy who can be moved around this O-line if need be. And the one name that comes to mind immediately for the Cardinals is Francis Mauigoa. Francis Mauigoa is listed as a tackle, and he can no doubt play tackle, but he also can be moved to guard if needed. That's been speculated a lot in from analysts and stuff like that, and they don't need to move him to guard, but he does present that upside if need be to really move some pieces around this O-line. And Francis Mauigoa, like other Miami players, had one hell of a year this year, and he's 6'6". He's got that athletic frame. He's got really good capabilities as a pass blocker, and he's pretty decent as a run blocking tackle. And I think he'd be a great fit for the Cardinals here based on their team needs. So that pick makes a lot of sense to me here at 3. And moving on to 4, the Titans need a lot of positional needs. Obviously, they need an edge. They could use an upgrade on the O-line. I don't think they're going to go O-line in this draft. I think receiver is definitely in play here. A guy like Carnell Tate makes a lot of sense at 4. But with Ruben Bain being available at 4, I am going to have him take Ruben Bain. Again, I know I went David Bailey first here for the Jets over Ruben Bain, but Ruben Bain is worthy of a top 5 pick. He is one of the best edges, if not the best edge in this class, and he fills a big need for the Titans here at 4. I think Ruben Bain makes a lot of sense here if they don't go receiver. And moving on to 5, so Caleb Downs makes a lot of sense for the Giants. I just don't see a safety going this high. We've seen safeties go this high before, like Jamal Adams. That didn't really work out. I think Caleb Downs is a better prospect than Jamal Adams. I think he's one of the best players, maybe even top 5 players in this draft class as a prospect, but I don't see Caleb Downs going 5 overall to the Giants. The Giants have other needs, and it looks like they have found their quarterback of the future, at least for the next couple of seasons, with Jackson Dart. And with Wan'Dale Robinson likely gone this year via free agency, you really need another receiver on this team. With Malik Nabers is elite, but he's coming off an ACL injury. I think he'll be okay, but still, you're going to want a second receiver regardless if he's okay. Guys like Jalen Hyatt and Darius Slayton aren't going to cut it as your wide receiver 2 alongside Malik Nabers. So I think receiver makes a lot of sense here. And when we're looking at this 2026 draft class, 3 receivers pop out. And those 3 receivers are Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, and Mekhi Lemon. All these guys offer upside in their own unique ways. All these guys have some cons in their own unique ways. And my favorite receiver in this class actually is Mekhi Lemon as things stand. I don't think he presents the most upside, but I do think he is the safest bet out of these 3. Jordan Tyson's got injury concerns. If Jordan Tyson didn't have serious injury concerns, he would no doubt be the top receiver, and he might still be the top receiver. But my reasoning with Mekhi Lemon is you get a guy who's undersized in comparison to Jordan Tyson and Carnell Tate, but he has produced in college. He's put up crazy numbers with 1,100 yards this year, and he's just been an elite receiver. He runs his routes, he's open, he has steady hands. And even at 5'11", he gets comped with Amon-Ra St. Brown a lot, which honestly, like comps don't mean anything, but it's a really good comp. And is Amon-Ra the best receiver in the league? No. Is he a top 3 receiver in the league? I don't think so. But they don't need Mekhi Lemon to be the best receiver in the league. You got Malik Nabers, who has wide receiver 1 overall potential, and then Mekhi Lemon is the perfect complementary receiver to him, with having the potential to also be another wide receiver 1 alongside Malik Nabers. And I think Mekhi Lemon gives the Giants some security, where if you take a guy with Jordan Tyson with some injury concern, you already have Malik Nabers who has some injury concern. I would prefer to go safer with Mekhi Lemon, who also has elite upside, to be that second receiver for Jackson Dart. And then real quick on Carnell Tate, I think Carnell Tate is really great. He offers that NFL wide receiver frame in comparison to Mekhi Lemon. But again, I like Mekhi Lemon's fit alongside Malik Nabers in this offense, and I think those 2 could be a lethal duo. But if they went Jordan Tyson here, if they went Carnell Tate, none of these would be the wrong pick. But with Mekhi Lemon just being my favorite receiver in this draft overall, I'm going to have the Giants take him at 5. And then moving on to the Browns, this is another team that really needs a receiver. Jerry Jeudy has his moments, but he hasn't been what he was projected to be out of Alabama. And I mean, the Browns could use an upgrade at quarterback, let's be real, but they're not going to do it in this draft at sixth overall. They could improve the O line, but I think it really makes sense to nab one of these higher end receivers in this class. And I will have them taking Carnell Tate. I think Carnell Tate will ultimately go over Jordan Tyson, again, because of Jordan Tyson's injury concerns. And Carnell Tate is, I think, an inch taller than Jordan Tyson, offers a little bit more of that, again, NFL frame, which teams really like to target in the draft. And Carnell Tate played alongside Jeremiah Smith all year. Jeremiah Smith he's a generational prospect. We hear this with players all the time, but he is truly a generational prospect. And even alongside him this year, he was overlooked by him, as you would with a player like Jeremiah Smith. But Carnell Tate was still able to put up nearly 900 receiving yards. He had 9 touchdowns, and he just showed a lot of flashes of being worthy of a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft. So Carnell Tate makes a lot of sense here for the Browns, for regardless of whatever quarterback is back there throwing the ball to him. But I think he gives them that upside of a true wide receiver one, which they desperately need. And then moving on to the Saints. So the Saints can go a lot of ways here. Before the Saints, the Commanders. The Commanders can go a lot of ways here, but I think the Commanders really need to address their defense, and especially that front seven. I think they have a lot of holes in general on that defense, but I think front seven with edge and linebacker being big ones. And there's a guy in this draft class you can address. You can address both edge and linebacker with this pick, and that's Arvell Reese. I'm not confident Arvell Reese makes it out the top 5 as we get closer to the draft. But for now, with the way this mock draft is falling, he's going 7 to Washington. Arvell Reese immediately addresses Washington's need for a linebacker and a player with upside as a pass rusher. He is one of the more well-rounded defensive players in this class who can make, again, day one impact as a front seven player. I think Arvell Reese would be a home run pick for honestly any of these teams in the top 7, but it makes a lot of sense here for Washington. Again, a team that really needs to fix up a lot of holes on that defense. Moving on to the Saints. So the Saints can go a lot of ways here. It looks like Tyler Shough is their quarterback for at least next season. I mean, he's an Offensive Rookie of the Year finalist. He looked pretty good second half of the season, but that Saints offensive roster is really not setting up any quarterbacks for success. Chris Olave was great this year. Alvin Kamara's fallen off a cliff there. The O-line's decent. You took Kelvin Banks last year. That helps at least. But this offense could definitely improve alongside Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. And I think it makes a lot of sense here for the Saints to go Jordan Tyson. Another player that makes a lot of sense here is Jeremiah Love. But I'm going to go Jordan Tyson in this mock draft today. This gives the Saints another elite receiver alongside Chris Olave to really make Tyler Shough's life easier next season. And again, if Jordan Tyson stays healthy, there's a really good chance he is the best receiver in the 2026 NFL draft class. But there is real injury concern. But for a team like the Saints, again, who need a big playmaker, I think it makes sense to take a swing on Jordan Tyson here. Moving on to number 9. This is a really easy pick for me if the draft falls this way, and that is Jeremiah Love. I don't see a world where Jeremiah Love makes it out of the first 9 picks of this year's draft. Jeremiah Love might be the best player in the 2026 NFL draft, but as we know, running backs tend to not go top 5. I mean, there are exceptions, Ashton Jeanty, Leonard Fournette some years back, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley going pretty high, but they were like around 6 and 8 and around that range. But Jeremiah Love isn't going to make it out of the top 9. And if he's there at 9 for the Chiefs, they need to run up there with their selection in hand. This is a team that clearly needs to address their run game. Mahomes is going to miss some time as well with his recent knee injury. So whoever is in at quarterback for the first month or 2 of the season, they're going to need to rely on the run. And right now they're not cutting it with Kareem Hunt. And they had Clyde Edwards-Helaire back in the mix at one point in the season. Isaiah Pacheco doesn't seem like the player he was pre-injury like 2 years ago. And then Jeremiah Love could be a top 5 NFL running back in his rookie season. He is an elite talent. And this would make the Chiefs scary once again. And if Mahomes comes back, or when Mahomes comes back, if he's even 80% of himself, you give him a player like Jeremiah Love, and they could be in contention to win that AFC again if they fix up a couple other holes on that team. So Jeremiah Love makes a lot of sense here. I think this would be his best landing spot from a fantasy perspective in the top 10. And again, this would just be, I think, be scary. And I don't think a lot of people want to see the Chiefs add a guy like Jeremiah Love. But moving on to pick 10. So the Bengals, I wish they listened to me last year and didn't go Shamar Stewart. I had them mocked in most of my mock drafts, taken Nick Emmanwori, who has been, in my opinion, the defensive rookie of the year. Carson Schwarzenegger has been great for the Browns, but Emmanwori has made a difference, which was it's a clear difference. If you watched the NFC Championship last night, that's the only time you saw the Seahawks play this year. The player that stuck out the most outside of JSN and maybe Sam Darnold was Nick Emmanwori. This guy has been all over the field this season, or he has been all over the field this season, has been an immediate difference maker as a safety. So when you think of a player like that, another player that comes to mind is Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs has all that potential that Nick Emmanwori had entering the draft and more. Caleb Downs is a blue chip prospect in this draft and is an elite talent. And I'm telling y'all, man, if the Bengals took Nick Emmanwori last year, they'd be in a lot better shape on defense than they are now. And this is their chance to make up for that mistake and take Caleb Downs. Again, it's really rare to see a safety go this high in drafts, but Caleb Downs is worthy of being a top 10 pick. If you just look at his stats over the last 3 seasons, I take PFF grades with a grain of salt, but PFF grades do mean something, and his PFF grades have been elite in all 3 seasons he's been in college. And he's good in coverage, he's good against the run, he is just a great player that can be used all over the field, and he will make a clear difference. When you're watching football, you can tell Caleb Downs is making a difference on the field, and this Bengals defense desperately needs guys like that. They just don't have anyone like that, especially with Trey Hendrickson about to leave. They did have D Knight, who looked pretty good as a rookie this year, but they need way more than one linebacker to really fix this defense, and you start by drafting Caleb Downs. I think he makes a lot of sense here at 10 for the Bengals, and it would be a home run pick. Moving on to the Dolphins. So this was a pick that took me, I was perplexed because the Dolphins have a lot of holes. Quarterback, you could add another receiver. Their O-line needs help. Their defensive line needs help. Their secondary needs help. This team is really in the mud. And I didn't know where to go. At first, I wanted to have them address the trenches. Peter Woods was the guy that came to my mind. Caleb Banks was another name I considered. But they went Kenneth Grant in the first round last year, so I avoided going interior D-line. And then some of these edges, I thought it made more sense for the Dolphins to target a cornerback here over an edge. So looking at the cornerbacks here, you have Jermod McCoy, who is supposed to be the number 1 corner in this class, at least as a prospect, but he is coming off an ACL injury, and that I think is going to end up scaring some teams away from making him the first corner off the board. Another guy that here that would make sense is Sonny Styles, but he doesn't really bring that pass rush presence. He is a great linebacker, especially against the run, and he is a great coverage linebacker. But I think the Dolphins, if they're going to go front 7, they're going to target a guy who can get to the quarterback. But when I'm looking at the edges on the board, there are some really interesting prospects here. Don't get me wrong. But I do have them targeting cornerback over edge. And edge is a more valuable position, but let's not act like cornerback is not a massive need for this Dolphins team. So I think a guy that makes a lot of sense here is Mansour Delane. He had a hell of a year at LSU this year. And he transferred from VT to LSU. And he had his best year at LSU, probably against the best quality of receivers he's played throughout the season, being in the SEC. And he, again, really excelled this year. He had a 27.5, he allowed a 27.5% passer rating when targeted, and he just was completely locked down this season. So I think, again, Mansour Delane makes a lot of sense here for the Dolphins. I think he'd be a very, very solid pick and give them a real lockdown corner to build off of in this defense. So moving on to number 12, another team that really needs secondary help here is Dallas. And Jermod McCoy does make a lot of sense, but I don't think Dallas drafts Jermod McCoy because they did draft Siobhan Revel last year in the 3rd round. He also was coming off with ACL concerns after a devastating injury in his last season entering into the draft. And he was not only the worst ranked cornerback rookie cornerback in the NFL last season. He was the worst ranked cornerback out of all cornerbacks in the NFL. So I think the Cowboys are going to see Jermod McCoy on the board. And let's not get this twisted. I think Jermod McCoy is a way better prospect than Siobhan Revel. But again, ACL injury. I think when they see Jermod McCoy's name on the board, Dallas is going to be wary of this pick and go in another direction. And again, I see lots of Cowboys fans saying they don't think Jerry's going to draft a linebacker. But it makes a lot of sense for this team to go Sonny Styles here. And that's ultimately who I have them drafting, because Sonny Styles just gives them a real presence in the middle to really make this a more solid front seven. This defense could use a lot of upgrades, and Sonny Styles will go a long way in giving them a guy. Again, he excels in pass coverage. And when your secondary is really weak, it helps to have a linebacker who can help out in pass coverage. So it makes a lot of sense to get a guy who's a leader like Sonny Styles in that linebacker room and address some needs on that defense. And overall, just build around him and some of the pieces you have on that D-line. And you can address a position like cornerback in the second round of this year's draft. And the Cowboys also have another pick in the first round from the Micah Parsons trade. So I mean, they have opportunities to address corner. Again, there are some really good corners, or there are some really good prospects at corner who I think you can nab in the second round, and even with their other first round picks. So Sonny Styles makes a lot of sense here for me, even though I know people have been saying Jerry's not going to draft a linebacker. But hey, man, at some point you got to change your ways and really fix this team if you're trying to win a Super Bowl. So the Rams, it's crazy. Such a good team like the Rams with the 13th pick. They got this from Atlanta last year when Atlanta traded up for James Pierce Jr. And at the time, I was like, what are the Falcons doing? But JPJ had 10.5 sacks in his rookie season. So it might have been worth trading up for him. We'll see. One season doesn't tell all. It doesn't tell you if a trade was worth it. But it's a promising start to his career. But either way, the Rams hold the Falcons pick here. And the Rams could go a couple of directions. They were already a super solid team this season. But, I mean, the Rams, in my opinion, could use a new quarterback or could add to their quarterback room with Matt Stafford coming to the end of his career. But I don't think this is the year to do it, especially not – I mean, they could do it on day 2 or day 3, but not in the first round. You're not going to use a 13th pick on Ty Simpson here, let's be real. So I think their biggest needs are definitely their secondary with cornerback and safety. And I think overall they could add some defensive depth at any position and really just bolster their defense. As they have really good starters, but their depth is just not where it could be. And another position of need is O-line. And another lower priority position of need is wide receiver, because you got Devontae Adams, who's near the end of his career. I think he should be there next year, but you never know. Puka Nacua is obviously their wide receiver 1, but outside of those two, no one really sticks out as a solid wide receiver 3. And we do know, this is confirmed, that in last year's draft, the Rams did try to trade up to Carolina's pick to draft Tetairoa McMillan, and that was with Puka and Devontae on the team. So the Rams clearly think they can add another young, talented receiver for their future. But with all three, Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, and Mekhi Lemon off the board here, I don't think they go receiver at 13. And I think they do focus on the secondary with cornerback and safety. So looking at some of these guys that are available here in the secondary, Jermod McCoy makes sense for a team like the Rams, who can take some more risks on a guy like Jermod McCoy. He's got the injury risk, but we know he's an elite talent. And if he doesn't work out, I mean, the Rams have another first-round pick. The Rams are already a team that was on the cusp of making the Super Bowl. It's not like if they miss on this pick, they're doomed for the next 3 years. They have the capability, or they have the freedom to take some more risks, unlike a team like Miami, who went safer route with another elite talent in Mansour Delane. So ultimately, the Rams, looking at the cornerbacks on the board, Avon Terrell, he's 5'11". I think teams are going to pass on him a lot in the first round. He didn't have a year. He didn't have the year that we thought he would have this year. He allowed an abysmal 95% pass rating when being targeted, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns. Those stats don't tell the full story, but there's no doubt he took a step back this season. And I don't think he is on that level of Jermod McCoy, even a Colton Hood, even a Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. So when I look at who's on the board here, I do think, again, the Rams can take a guy like Jermod McCoy. They're not going to take a safety here. I think there's some solid safety prospects for day two, but I don't think we'll see many safeties outside of Caleb Downs go in this year's first round. So we'll go Jermod McCoy here. And if he pans out for the Rams, that is a major dub, and that will just make their team even more dangerous come next season. Moving on to the Ravens. So the Ravens are not in a rebuild, but they're in a transitionary state with a new coach coming in. I think Lamar's still going to be there next season, but there's going to be some changes to this roster and, of course, to this coaching staff. But one of the biggest needs when I look at the Ravens roster going into next season is their D-line. You took Mike Green at the edge position in last year's draft, and I mean, he showed some flashes, but he's not a fortified star defensive end yet, and we don't know if he ever will be. You have Matt Abike in the interior, who's really got some serious injury. He had a serious injury and has some serious medical concerns. They were saying he might never play again. I hope he plays again. He's one hell of a player, an elite defensive player, and he would be a major loss. So I think it would make sense for the Ravens to target the D-line here. A receiver is another position of need. But again, I think D-line makes a lot of sense with some uncertainties. And when you're playing against guys like Joe Burrow in your division, potentially having to face up against Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Drake May, Justin Herbert in the playoffs to go and finally win that Super Bowl, you're going to need pass rush presence and guys who can get to the quarterback. So when we look at the the D-line, players on the D-line available at 14, Keldrick Falk is a name that's thrown out there a lot. Peter Woods is a really solid target if you want to focus on the D-line. But if I were the Ravens, I think I'd look more so to the edge position. Again, to get a guy who can get to the quarterback. Cassius Howell is a really interesting player. He excelled in pass rush this year for A&M. He had 12 sacks. But I do think he's a little unpolished compared to some of the other players in this draft. I think his run defense is just not where it needs to be. He is going to be able to get to the quarterback, in my opinion. He is a little undersized at 6'2", 248, but I don't think this is the route the Ravens take. And Keldrick Falk, guys, he just reminds me a lot of Shamar Stewart, who was taken last year around this range, and Chop Robinson, who was taken around 22 drafts ago. And the reason he reminds me of those two players is he's got a lot of hype based on his size, being 6'6", I think like 285. His athleticism, the stats just aren't there to make him. The stats just aren't there to back him up as a top 20 pick in this draft. I said the same thing about Shamar Stewart last year. Shamar Stewart was a guy entering the draft who had just I think a sack and a half entering the season, or maybe 2 sacks. And people were just banking on the fact that he's big, he's athletic, and Shamar Stewart had some injuries last season, but he was terrible. That was not a good pick, at least judging based on what we saw as a rookie. He was 21 years old. Chop Robinson was 21 years old entering the draft. And Keldrick Falk is 20 years old, so he's even younger than the two. I don't know if he'll be 21 by the time the draft rolls around, but either way, he's really young. He's a player that has that athletic potential, and he could be a force if developed properly, but I don't think the Ravens are looking to add a guy like that. Mike Green had a really productive college career, putting up the stats, but he also was kind of a project edge when being drafted. So I think the Ravens are going to look to add an edge or a defensive lineman that's a little more polished. And I think a guy who's going to really shoot up boards, he already has started to shoot up boards, but will continue to shoot up boards as we get closer to April, is Akeem Mesidor. He is a little older at 24, but I don't think that's a problem for the team like the Ravens, who aren't looking to fully rebuild. They have Lamar Jackson. They're looking to contend for a Super Bowl. And Akeem Mesidor, alongside Ruben Bain Jr. this season, was elite. So again, him being 24 kind of helps a team like Baltimore. I think he's more polished. I think he's a guy who can make more of an impact immediately. And just looking at some of his stats from this season, he had 13 sacks. That's more than all the guys I've already mentioned that we've just talked about. And he's just overall an elite prospect. And again, I think he's going to have a good combine. And I think teams are really just going to value some of the more polished aspect of his game. if that makes sense. So I think again, Hakeem Mesidor is a guy who's going to shoot up, and I guess the argument against him is that he played alongside Ruben Bain, which opened up more opportunities for him. But I mean, he excelled when those opportunities were opened up for him. So I don't think that should take away from the player that he is. So I'm going to have the Ravens taking Hakeem Mesidor here at 14. And again, I was even considering him at 11 for the Dolphins, but I think it's too early for all that. And I think there are guys like Sonny Styles and Mansour Delane who are better prospects than Hakeem Mesidor. But Hakeem Mesidor is a guy who, again, I think he's going to shoot up boards and be a top 15, top 16 type of guy come April. And then moving on to the Bucks. So when we look at the Bucks, this is a team that I think could make a lot of improvements on the defensive side of things. Front seven, secondary, just overall that whole defense. I think the interior O-line is another place they could focus on. But for the sake of this draft, I think I'm going to focus on the defense because, again, defense is overall a pretty big need for this team. And now you have a division where the Falcons are looking a little better. Tyler Shuck's looking like he could do something for the Saints. And Bryce Young and the Panthers offense won the division this year. It looked pretty solid overall. So the Bucks are going to need to improve their defense. They can't just rely on the fact that they're the big dogs in the division anymore. It's going to be a competitive division, even if it is a division where 9 wins gets the team to the playoffs. But either way, they're going to need a defense to really get back and win the NFC South next year if they want to. So looking at some of the players here on defense, I think we'll look at the secondary first, and we're not going to go safety. And looking at the corners, I think Colton Hood could be in play here. I have him over Terrell for sure. I think it's too early for Brandon Cisse. There's some guys like Chris Johnson who I think are going to be really good day 2 picks, but I think it's too early for someone like that too. Dylan Thieneman is a good, really solid safety prospect for day 2, but again, I think it is too early for a safety. And then again, some of the other guys here like D'Angelo Pons, I think this is just way too early. I think these are all kind of day 2 talents. So I'm going to skip out on addressing the secondary, and we'll move on to the D-line. And looking at the D-line, I think a guy like Peter Woods would make sense. I think a guy like Caden McDonald would make sense, who was a really good run defensive D-lineman this year, who is big and can make a difference. I think a guy like Christian Miller could make a lot of sense. Again, another guy who's got that big build and could really contribute as an interior D-lineman. But also looking at the edges here, Keldrick Falk is a name that could make sense here. Again, I'm not super high on him. I just think he's, again, one of those Shamar Stewart kind of guys. Cassius Howe, I don't think the Bucks would be taking a guy like him here. R. Mason Thomas is a really interesting name to look at here. Romello Height is a super interesting name. But I think over all these guys, I would see TJ Parker going here at 15. TJ Parker is another Clemson player who didn't really have the season we expected him to have, an elite season like he had 2 years ago. But he still wasn't a bad player by any means last season. But again, we saw him really boom in 2024, which we just saw a big step back in 2025. But we saw the upside with TJ Parker in 2024. And I think like a team like the Bucks could get the best out of TJ Parker. And if he gets that level that we saw him get at 2024, at worst, he's a decent edge player who will make a difference. But if he can build off of that, which we should expect him to once he makes it to the NFL level, he could be a 8 to 10 sack kind of guy, similar to a James Pierce Jr. So I do like TJ Parker here for the Bucks. I think it makes a lot of sense here at 15. All right, so we go to the Jets' second pick here in the first round of pick 16. They got this in the trade with the Colts when they gave up Sauce Gardner. So the Jets did go David Bailey in this mock draft at 2. So they addressed a big positional need, someone on the front seven who can get to the quarterback. And again, the Jets are far from being a competitive team. So I think they could address almost every position here and dub. They could double down on the D-line and pair a guy who can either get to the quarterback with David Bailey or a guy who excels in stopping the run. Because David Bailey, he was decent against the run last season. But his bread and butter is getting to the quarterback. We saw 15 sacks, and that is just where he excels as a player. And it would be nice to get a guy who can stop the run alongside him, so you're not asking David Bailey to do something that he's not, So, again, you could double down here on the D-line or at linebacker and get a guy who can stop the run, or you could even address a positional need like cornerback. Again, I don't see a safety going this early, so we're not going to look at a safety. But a guy like Colton Hood does make a lot of sense here. He's a corner, again, that's been getting a lot of traction entering this draft. And I do think he's going to be a first round pick. Same with Brandon Cisse. I think he's going to be a first round pick. Terrell, he might be a first round pick. I'm just like, again, I'm not super high on him considering his size and the season he just had this season. But for the sake of this mock draft, I am going to focus on doubling down on the D line. And again, Peter Woods makes a lot of sense here, but he wasn't really that good against the run, as we can see. But again, like other Clemson players, he had a down year in comparison to maybe, definitely last season, maybe even the season before that. Keldrick Falk, I'm not going to do that to the Jets. I just think he would be destined to be a bust there. But look at the interior D line. I think Caleb Banks would be destined to be a bust there. I'm just not super high on Caleb Banks. Again, he offers that upside as a 6'6", 330-pound interior D lineman who, if the injuries don't have an impact on him, he only played 3 games last year, but if the injuries don't have an impact on him, this guy could be a legitimate NFL interior D lineman who wreaks havoc and can stop the run, can get to the quarterback. He was elite at getting to the quarterback in 2024 when he was healthy. So we've seen the upside. But again, I would see the Jets go for a safer option. And I think a guy that makes a lot of sense here is Christian Miller out of Georgia. He is a very solid defensive prospect who I think will end up being a top 24 kind of pick. He's 6'4", he's 310, he is big. He really has that prototypical NFL star defensive line type of build. He brings that size. He brings that violence, that aggressiveness. And he was elite against the run this year with a 90.2 PFF grade against the run. He's not a guy that gets to the quarterback as we've seen over his college career. But again, you don't need that when you just drafted David Bailey. I think Christian Miller could really complement David Bailey really well and give Aaron Glenn, a defensive coach, 2 big pieces on this defensive line who could really get this team in the right direction, at least, So I think this would be a really safe-ish kind of pick for the Jets here and get them, again, just trending in the right direction because that's all the Jets fans want to see right now. And then moving on to the lines, the 2 biggest positional needs for this team, in my opinion, are cornerback and defensive end. So those are the positions we'll look at here. They desperately need to get another edge alongside They desperately need to get another edge alongside Hutch who can get to the quarterback because they just don't have that right now. I really wanted to see them take a guy like Donovan Ezaraku last year, which they didn't end up doing. And Ezaraku's been pretty decent for the Cowboys, but again, it's not like they missed out on someone like an elite guy, But Ezaraku was really young entering the draft, so he could still be that. But either way, let's not talk about the past. We'll talk about this upcoming draft. But we got cornerbacks and edges to focus on here. And I think a guy like, again, Colton Hood keeps coming up. He makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams that need a corner. But I'm going to focus on an edge, looking at some of these names up here. And the Lions showed us last year they're not scared to take a guy that may not be a projected first-round pick in the first round. They're going to take the guys that they like, especially on the D-line. So we can go deep here. I mean, you got Keldrick Falk and Cassius Howell, kind of the obvious names that come up on this side of the draft. Mason Thomas is another really good prospect who had a really favorable season when you're entering the draft and has some of those skills and that athletic upside you want to see for an edge. He's a little undersized at 6'2", though, I will say. Gabe Jackas, another solid player, but I wouldn't put him over a lot of other guys who I like in this area. Romello Height was elite this year. He had 9 sacks, 11 hits. He was just a force on that D-line. He made a difference. And as you can see from just his PFF grades, his pass rush win rate was 21.8%, which is very good. He wasn't that good against the run, but again, he got to the quarterback. He is 6'3", 240, not bad. Could be a little bigger, but I mean, that takes away from his speed a little bit if he was a little bigger, so can't complain there. But there are some good prospects out here. Even Zion Young, who was, by the way, just arrested for DWI 2 days ago, but he's another solid prospect who had a pretty productive year over there at Mizzou. And then even LT Overton's a decent prospect. We've seen him have better seasons than the last season. But just looking at who is on the board here, I think the Lions are a team that would be enamored by a Keldrick Falk. And if he pans out alongside Hutchinson, he's going to be a force. Again, I'm not super high on him, but guys, like we saw Shamar Stewart go around this range last year. Again, we saw Chop Robinson go around 22 seasons ago. Teams love to take gambles on big edges who are athletic, who have some youth, who offer that upside. And I think that a team like the Lions would swing for the fences here with Keldrick Falk and take him at 17. So that's who I have the Lions taking there. And moving on to the Vikings. So the Vikings could go a couple ways here. If this was a deeper, or if not a deeper, if this was a running back class with some elite prospects in the elite first round type of prospects, I would see them maybe go running back here. They could definitely address the interior O line, guard and center are needs, linebackers need. I think cornerback is a massive need. And we'll look at the linebackers left on the board here and the corners. Again, safety, I'm not really addressing for teams in the first round. But if we're looking at cornerbacks and linebackers, we got Terrell. Again, I'm taking Colton Hood over any position where I'm taking a corner. CJ Allen could make some sense here. But I think the Vikings, again, are a team that struggled against the pass. And CJ Allen just doesn't offer that upside as a coverage linebacker, so I don't think he makes a lot of sense here. I'm going to go Colton Hood here. I think he is the best corner available on the board with the most upside, and I think the most well-rounded corner available on the board at this, maybe not the most well-rounded, but the guy who offers the most upside at this point in the draft, with the way this mock draft has been falling. So Colton Hood makes a lot of sense for the Vikings there. They address a big positional need. And then moving on to the Carolina Panthers, my squad. So the Panthers did win the division and make the playoffs last year, but I don't really think they had a really strong roster, at least on the defensive side of things. You no doubt need to make upgrades on the front seven, at slot corner, at safety, to replace Nick Scott. Because if you're they're playing a first place schedule next season. If they want to repeat as NFC South champions and make the playoffs, even contend, they're going to really need to bring in some guys to patch in holes in the front seven and again at safety and even at cornerback. So when I look at who's on the board here, they could go a lot of ways. They could even go tackle with Ike Ekwonu facing a brutal knee injury in that playoff game. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Panthers move on for a guy on a contract year, again, off a brutal injury, who's had his ups and downs. And Spencer Fano could make sense, but he is more of a right tackle. And the Panthers should be solid there for another season with Taylor Moton. So I don't think it makes sense to draft a guy like Spencer Moton to start grooming him to be the future right tackle, even though I think he's a really good prospect. Then I don't think it makes a lot of sense to take a guy like Caden Proctor here for the Panthers when there are some more high upside front seven kind of guys on the board. If Colton Hood was on the board here, I'd consider it, even though I think Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn are a great duo, and I wouldn't really put Colton Hood in that Shao Smith-Wade slot corner position. So I don't really like the way this board fell for the Panthers, if I'm being honest, as a Panthers fan. I would have loved a guy like Mesidor here. I would have even loved a TJ Parker. I definitely would have loved a Sonny Styles. I don't really expect him to be here at 19. Even a guy like Jermon McCoy and, of course, Mansour Delane. Any of those guys would have been home run picks here, in my opinion. But when I do look at who's on the board, I do like Peter Woods here. I think edge is definitely a way bigger need than interior D-line because you do have a guy like Derek Brown. But I think if you pair a guy like Peter Woods with Derek Brown, you have a really, really lethal and strong core in the middle of that D-line. So Peter Woods does make a lot of sense for me. Again, he did not have the greatest season last season, but we've seen the upside with him in the 2 years past. And I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to a lot of these Clemson players who are just a part of a really disappointing season for Clemson last season. So Peter Woods, I think, would be a really solid, almost safe-ish kind of pick for the Panthers here, and let them continue, bolstering up that D-line and then addressing a position like linebacker, which I do think linebacker is their biggest need, linebacker and edge. But there are some day two linebackers who I love, and a guy who as a Panthers fan, I would love to see him as a second round pick on this team. But I think as we get closer to the draft, he's not going to make it to where the Panthers pick in the second round, is Jacob Rodriguez. So Jacob Rodriguez was an elite linebacker in college. He won almost all the awards a linebacker can win. He was fifth in Heisman voting last season. He was one of two defensive players in top 10 of Heisman voting last year, the other being Caleb Downs, I think at 8 or 9. Jacob Rodriguez was elite at linebacker last season, and he excelled as a coverage linebacker, which is exactly what the Carolina Panthers need. The only issue here is that he's 6'1". He's a little undersized compared to a stereotypical NFL linebacker, which I think is keeping him out of first round mocks. But if the Panthers took him at 19, which I do think is a little bit of a reach, I would not be mad. I mean, this guy proved he is a very elite football player who has high football IQ, who seems to be a leader in the locker room. So I would not be mad with a guy like Jacob Rodriguez. And my dream scenario would be landing him in the second round. But again, I think as we get closer to April, teams are going to appreciate Jacob Rodriguez more as a player, and he will be more of like a end of first round, definitely beginning of the second round type of guy. But I just want to touch on him real quick. That is a name to watch out for as we get closer to April. And then moving on to the Dallas Cowboys. So the Cowboys, we have them take Sonny Styles at pick 12. So again, addressing a big need in the front seven. Cowboys really missed out with Colton Hood here. I don't think they take Terrell here, honestly, at 20. I'm just not high on him. I'm not giving him the same benefit of doubt I gave Peter Woods and TJ Parker. I just don't think he's a first round cornerback, especially in the top 20. I think he's more of a day 2 guy you take. So looking at what other directions the Cowboys can go, I don't think they go running back here. PFF has that listed as one of their big needs. I have their biggest needs, again, cornerback and safety being 1 and 2, tackle being up there, and then linebacker and running back. But looking at who's on the board here, what makes the most sense to me, I'm assuming they re-signed George Pickens, so receiver doesn't end up being a need. I don't really think they take a tackle here at 20, even though maybe you could take Spencer Fano. But I think you could maybe take a guy like Brandon Cisse here. Even maybe a guy like, what cornerbacks are even left on the board? Hold on a sec. Even maybe, I just wouldn't go all the way to say take a guy like Chris Johnson or Keith Abney here. Just not yet. I think the Cowboys could address cornerback in the second round. So when I look at who's on the board, I feel like Cassius Howell is a player the Cowboys would like to add to the mix. Again, he was an elite pass rusher last year. He's a little undersized, but the Cowboys have some guys already at the edge and on this front seven who can get to the quarterback. I think Cassius Howell can just complement them really well and he can get to the quarterback. And this is a guy that can continue to develop. And if he can really add some size at the NFL level and just polish up his game, he could be a guy that gets you 8 to 11 sacks a season. So Cassius Howell stays in Texas. I think that makes a lot of sense here for the Cowboys. So now you have Sonny Styles and Cassius Howell in the first round, which I think is a very strong way to retool your defense and start building towards an elite defense. And moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers here. The Steelers need a quarterback next year, or at least a quarterback for the future. I think Aaron Rodgers might end up being their quarterback next year. We'll see what this new coaching staff wants to do. He didn't play bad, but he's just not, there's no youth and upside there. But either way, if Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback or anyone else, you need another receiver alongside DK Metcalf. They just don't have that dangerous second receiving threat, whether it be a tight end or a receiver that can consistently show up and make some crazy plays. And a guy that makes a lot of sense to me here is Casey Concepcion. I think the idea of Casey Concepcion is better than what I think he's actually going to end up being in the NFL. But I really hope Casey Concepcion pans out because he's electric. He gets up, he gets the ball. He's only 5'11", but he makes plays and he's explosive. He's athletic and he's just a player that if he pans out, he's going to be super fun to watch. And it's worth taking that gamble here at pick 21 for the Steelers with, again, a guy like Casey Concepcion. He had a really solid year at A&M this season, and you already have a big guy in DK Metcalf. So if you can add a more shorter, athletic speedster kind of guy who can also, like DK Metcalf, go and get the ball, I think that could go a long way for whoever's at quarterback for Pittsburgh next season. So Casey Concepcion is the pick at 21. We have two A&M guys going back to back there. And then going to the Chargers, I think Spencer Fano is a dream fit here for them at 22. Their biggest need is their O-line. They need to protect Justin Herbert, improve that O-line so Omarion Hampton can get the ball, or get the ball, they can get Omarion Hampton going in the run game. So it just makes a lot of sense. Spencer Fano, I think, would be a dream scenario for Chargers fans there. Going on to 23, the Eagles, they have some needs, I think mostly in the trenches. I'm going to go under the assumption that they do re-sign Dallas Goedert. If not, Kenyon Sadiq is the pick here, in my opinion. And safety's another need. They're not going to go safety again this early. I don't think so. So we'll focus on the trenches, and we can look at, I think they're fine at tackle for sure. So we'll look at the interior O-line, and while we're at it, we'll look at the D-line. So looking at, I'm not high on Caleb Banks. I do like Caden McDonald. He actually had a lot of good production at Ohio State last season. He's elite against the run. He's 6'3", 326, pretty good size. But I'm looking at some of these other edges here. I don't think I would take them over someone like Emmanuel Pregnon. So looking at the two guards on the board who are kind of here higher up in the big board, Ione provides the ability as a player you can move around the O-line more than you can with Pregnon. Pregnon is more of a true guard, but Pregnon is what the Eagles need. They don't really need a guy that can move around the O-line because they have their tackles. They need a guard, a guy who can be an elite guard. They can plug in and really regroup this O-line to be elite once again. So I think Pregnon makes a lot of sense. He had a really good year at Oregon as an Oregon Duck. He was good against the pass. He was good against the run. And overall, just a really solid year, played all their games. And I think he would be a very safe bet here. No one's a safe bet, but I think in comparison to some of these other guys they could take here, I think he'd be a safe bet to rebolster up that O-line for Philly. And then moving on to the Cleveland Browns. So they have another pick. This is from last year's trade with Jacksonville, where Jacksonville traded up for Travis Hunter. So we had the Browns address a big need with Carnell Tate. So it was a good thing they did that because Carnell Tate really offers them that elite type of upside receiver where I think there are some decent names here who could be good wide receiver twos. I don't think any of these guys would have filled their need as an elite wide receiver one. So looking at who's available on the board, I think it makes a lot of sense for Cleveland to go O-line here. O-line is a massive need for this team. And again, I don't think the quarterbacks they have on the team right now are their quarterbacks of the future, but it makes sense to build this team through the draft and free agency for that quarterback who I could see them drafting in 2027. So looking at who's here, I think there's some decent tackle options. Caleb Tiernan's a good option. He's big. He's 6'7", 325. He had a decent year last year. He had a solid year the year before, but overall he's a solid prospect that I think can develop into a starting tackle in the league. A guy like Caleb Lomu, I'm not super high on. I mean, he has that crazy athletic upside, which is going to probably make him a first round pick. I just don't think the production is there in comparison to some of these other tackles. I think he's more of a project kind of tackle. And to be honest, the Browns don't need to be taking on a lot of projects right now. A name that makes a lot of sense to me, though, is Caden Proctor. Like Tiernan, he's also 6'7". He's also massive at 366. He's a younger prospect. He's not perfect. He needs to polish up his game a bit, especially, overall as a pass blocker and a run blocker. But we've seen him, he had a really, overall good year at Alabama last year. And he, again, has a frame, plays in the SEC, has went up against elite type of defensive linemen. And he played 963 snaps all at left tackle last year. And overall, again, was a really good left tackle for Alabama. So I think Caden Proctor makes a lot of sense for the Browns here. Addressing a huge need on the O-line, and hopefully they get their offensive tackle of the future. And then moving on to the Bears. So the Bears' biggest need, the Bears roster is honestly really solid. We saw them have a good season, almost make it to the AFC Championship, but they could definitely upgrade on the D-line. And looking at who's available here, again, I touched on him earlier, but Caden McDonald is an interior D lineman I really like, especially I do like him over Caleb Banks. And I think that the Bears are going to look to target the interior D line over edge because just looking at their roster going into next season, it's a bigger need. They don't have a guy in there who can make a difference, stop the run. They don't, and then they can build around that and add some edges to really get the quarterback through free agency, through some of these later day 2, day 3 picks. I think Caden McDonald makes a lot of sense here. I've seen a lot of rumors that the Bears are going to be targeting the interior D line. A lot's going to change between now and April, but the way things stand currently, this pick just makes a lot of sense. Again, 6'3", 326, decent size, was really good against the run last year, and he doesn't excel at getting to the quarterback, but just like I just mentioned, they can build around this. So again, I think Caden McDonald is a good pick here for the Bears and a good first round prospect. Moving on to the Bills. The Bills, man, I am a little worried for them heading into next season. This roster is a little suspect. There's a lot of holes on a defense with some aging guys, some free agents. Maxwell Hairston, we'll see, but I don't know if he was the right pick in that secondary in last year's draft. You have a massive need at wide receiver. Keon Coleman is not it, bro. He fooled us in week 1 of last season going off, and I was not high on him entering last year's draft, but at that time I was like, maybe I was wrong about it, but no, I was not wrong. All the doubters, we can stay down. It does not look like he's going to pan out. Khalil Shakir is a really solid receiver, but he's not an ex wide receiver 1. He's more of a really dependable wide receiver 2 kind of guy. And if this team's going to bank on Josh Allen taking them to the Super Bowl, they need to give him a real wide receiver 1, a real true X type of weapon. And I could see the Bills going front 7 here, maybe taking another corner, but I think they're just going to go receiver, in my opinion. It sucks. Obviously, you're not going to get a guy like Carnell Tate here, not a Jordan Tyson. I doubt you're going to get Mekhi Lemon this late in the draft. So when you're looking at 26 here, I think you're going to have to work with these guys on the board. And I wouldn't be mad as a Bills fan if you took Denzel Boston. Denzel Boston is 6'4". He had a really solid year this season with 881 receiving yards. He has a 76.9% contested catch rate, which is really solid. Overall, just a good season as the receiver 1 for Washington. And when you pair that with Josh Allen, you're going to be able to unlock a higher level for whichever receiver comes into that system. And I think Denzel Boston could obviously improve with a quarterback like Josh Allen. And Josh Allen can do more with this offense with a receiver like Denzel Boston. So again, got to go receiver here. Denzel Boston makes a lot of sense. We'll see maybe the Bills address the wide receiver position through free agency or via trade in March. But for where things stand right now, Denzel Boston makes a lot of sense. Moving on to the Niners. This is another team that could use a receiver, but this is a team that could use a receiver, could fix a lot of holes on the defense, on the D-line, at safety, add to the interior O-line. So we'll look at who's just available on the board overall. Because again, I think with just the amount of injuries this team has, they could just address a lot of things. So looking at corner, you got Terrell, who could make some sense here. I think Ione makes a lot of sense here. But a name that makes even more sense than those two here is Kenyon Sadiq. With George Kittle getting up there in age and now an Achilles injury, which is probably going to keep him out from all of next season, unfortunately. And you have some uncertainties around Ricky Pearsall with recent injuries. I think Ricky Pearsall is going to be a solid receiver for them, but it's not a surefire thing. And you have just a lot of question marks. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk is no longer going to be a 49er. That just didn't work out. And you're going to need some more receiving options for Brock Purdy next season. And Jawan Jennings might be gone this season via free agency. We'll see. But again, Kenyon Sadiq makes a lot of sense. You address 2 positional needs here with Kenyon Sadiq at tight end, with George Kittle being out, and wide receiver. Because Kenyon Sadiq is a pure receiving threat at tight end. And again, this just gives you that receiving option that you desperately need on this team. So we'll go Kenyon Sadiq here at 27. I don't think he'll make it out the first round, but on the contrary, I do have concerns with Kenyon Sadiq. He doesn't have a lot of production in college, I think, to get the hype that he's getting as a top 15 pick, potential top 15 pick. I don't think he's a top 15 kind of guy. I have my doubts if he's even a top 20 kind of guy. I think he is a first round kind of guy for the upside he does possess. But y'all need to remember, OJ Howard had a lot of the same upside entering the draft a couple years ago, and he was drafted in the first round and just hasn't done anything. I'm not saying Kenyon Sadiq is OJ Howard, but I do see a lot of similarities between the two. And then moving on to the Texans, I don't care who's on the board here. You're going O-line. This O-line took a step forward this season, but the interior of his O-line is still far from perfect. And I think Ione makes a lot of sense here. He can be moved to tackle. He can play guard. He could maybe even play center. I don't know. But he's, again, just a Swiss Army knife on that O-line. And when you're a team like Houston that just needs to continue to improve that O-line, this just makes a lot of sense. Ione seems like a perfect pick here for Houston. Moving on to 229, the Rams get another pick. I think this is a really good trade back opportunity for them when we start doing trades. But for now, we're sticking to where picks are. So they took Jermon McCoy at 13. So they addressed a really big need in the secondary. And I think here is a good chance for them to just, add some depth in the trenches. This D-line could use some depth, of course. I think even this O-line could use some depth. Some of these guys, you never know. Injuries happen, guys getting older. So I think it just makes the most sense to take the best available, trenches kind of guy on either side here. So we'll look at the D-line and the O-line. Again, I'm not super high on Caleb Banks. Caleb Lomu, I think he makes a lot of sense here for the Rams. Again, this is a team that can take some more gambles on guys like Jermon McCoy, guys like Caleb Lomu, who possess potentially elite first round traits, but have some concerns with being more unpolished with injuries, things like that. I don't really see them taking any of these edges over here. Monroe Freeling, Dunker, I don't know. Caleb Tiernan, I think would be a really solid pick here. Again, I'm really high on Romello Height. Just from what we saw last year, I think he could be a good pick here. I think some of these linebackers could be good picks here, but I'm going to go with Caleb Lomu. He is supposed to be one of the top 3 tackle prospects in this draft. He might even be the top tackle prospect on some people's big boards. So I think this is a really good gamble for the Rams to take here. With a coach like McVay, you have a really good chance of really polishing him up and he doesn't even need to start on that O-line in his first year. Give him some time to develop, and he could be the tackle of the future for the Rams. All right, so moving on here. PFF hasn't updated yet. They have the Patriots picking 30, but the Patriots will be picking 31 or 32. Denver would be picking here. But for the sake of this mock draft, we'll go with what's on the board for PFF. And the way I have these picks laid out, they're not going to have an effect on each other, So we'll go with the Patriots if they were to pick here at 30. And again, this is going to be the same pick regardless. I would have them picking at 31 or 32. So the Patriots took a big step, obviously. They're in the Super Bowl after a 4-13 season. And the Patriots have needs, which is crazy to say, but they can definitely improve and be even scarier next year. And the biggest needs, in my opinion, are the interior O-line. They could definitely have an X kind of receiver. Edge is a place they can address. Safety is a position they can address. And looking at those positions, if we just narrow down to those, wide receiver, edge, interior O-line, and we'll look at safety because we're near the end of the first round now. I don't see them taking any of these receivers as their X kind of guy. I look at Chris Bell, Jeremy Bernard, Amari Cooper, Elijah Surratt for sure, Chris Brazzell. I look at these guys as more day 2 kind of guys, Skylar Bell. There's some upside with those guys. I think the Patriots are going to be better off trying to pursue a true elite kind of weapon for Drake May via free agency or trade. So we'll shift our attention here to interior O-line, safety, and edge. Looking at the interior O-lineman on the board here, I don't see them taking a guy like Chase Bisontis here. They don't really need to take a tackle here. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense. I think they'd be reaching for a lot of these guards and centers here. Like, I don't think they would take Connor Lew here. So we'll shift our attention to edge. So you got, again, R. Mason Thomas would be a pretty enticing pick here. Zion Young. But again, I've been saying his name throughout this draft. We're just going to go ahead and draft him now. Romello Height makes a lot of sense here for the Patriots. I think that is a potentially elite player adding to the mix to a team that's already in the Super Bowl. So as a Pats fan, I would be super happy with Romello Height and the upside he brings. All right, so moving on to the Broncos here. Their defense is elite. Their O-line is elite. They're good at quarterback. They could use some upgrades, though, and on the offense at skill positions. And I think running back would have made a lot of sense here. If there was a running back, I would be comfortable drafting at the end of the first round. This running back class is just not that talented outside of Jeremiah Love. But a name we should talk about is Jadarian Price. Jadarian Price had a pretty good season with 674 receiving yards as the running back 2 behind Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame. If he was the running back 1 on another team, I think he would have had a 1,000-yard season, and I think we would have seen him go as an end of the first round running back, potentially for a team that needs a running back. But I just don't think he's a first round prospect this season. I mean, when you watch his tape, he looked pretty solid when he got opportunities. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he is a good running back with some upside. But when you consider that guys like Travion Henderson and guys like Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins weren't even first round picks last year, I just don't see Jadarian Price as a better prospect than those two were, and I don't see him going in the first round, even in a shallow running back draft class. So we'll shift our attention to wide receiver and tight end. Again, tight end, Eli Stowers, I love as a tight end prospect entering this draft for a team that needs a receiving tight end. As a Carolina Panther fan, I would love Eli Stowers on day 2. I just don't see him being he might end up being a first round pick. I just would not use a first round pick on him, and that goes for all the other tight ends on the board here. So we'll shift our focus to receiver. I think what ends up happening for the Broncos here is that they take their shot on whichever receiver they like the most out of who is left. So I don't know who that's going to be. I'm pretty indifferent right now between guys like Chris Bell, Omar Cooper. I think Surratt is a really dependable type of wide receiver, but I think he's definitely more of a day 2 guy. I wouldn't take him here at the end of the first round, but I think there is potential for him to shoot up some boards as we get closer to the draft, considering he was just such a dependable, safe option for Mendoza this season. But if I'm going to Indiana receiver, I'll probably take the shot on Omar Cooper. He proved he can break tackles. He proved to have some more athletic upside than Surratt. And again, this is going to come down to, I think, who the Broncos have over what receiver they have ranked higher than the others on their big board at pick 30. And to the final pick of this draft, if the Seahawks end up winning the Super Bowl, they will be picking 32. And the Seahawks, again, like the Patriots for being a Super Bowl team, still have some needs that they can fill and be even more dangerous next season. I think most of these needs are in the second on the defense and some on the interior O-line, but I would look to address a position like cornerback. I think cornerback is the most glaring need on this team. You have guys like Witherspoon who were pretty decent this year, but he did struggle here and there. And Tariq Woolen is just not that elite cornerback he was looking to be his rookie season. So I think it makes a lot of sense to address cornerback and try to create a new Legion of Boom, which you're already off to a great start with Nick Emmanwori. Why not pair him with another South Carolina prospect and Brandon Cisse? Brandon Cisse has continued to just climb boards even in January. I think he's going to continue to. South Carolina corners tend to find good homes in the NFL draft in recent years. They climb boards. They're really athletic, and they just perform well at the combine. I think Cisse he's pretty unpolished. There is a lot of room for improvement, but overall, I think he is a kind of end of the first round, top of the second round type of prospect. Again, for a team like Seattle that could use a massive upgrade at corner, I think it makes sense to pair Emmanwori with his South Carolina teammate Brandon Cisse. So that is how I have the first round falling for my first mock draft of the year. Things are going to change drastically as we get closer to April, but as things stand, I do feel pretty good about how I have this mock draft going. What do you guys think? Are there any picks you don't agree with? Are there any picks you think are home run picks? I would love to hear what y'all have to say in the comments down below. And as always, if you like this video, please like, please subscribe, please share, and I will catch y'all later. Peace out.